Chapter 49. Her Power. The air on the 90th floor of the Sterling Blackwood Tower didn't feel thin anymore. It felt electric. I stood at the head of the reclaimed oak table, looking at the representatives of Vanguard Holdings. They were three men in identical charcoal suits, their faces carved from the same stone of corporate arrogance I had once mistaken for strength. They had come here today thinking they were walking into a vacuum. They thought that because Alexander Blackwood had resigned, the fortress was undefended. Miss Sterling, the lead representative, a man named Sterling, no relation, though he shared the name, said with a condescending tilt of his head, "We respect the idealistic shift you've taken with the foundation, but let's be pragmatic. The open-source release of the Factor 4 bridge has devalued your primary IP by 40%. Vanguard is offering a graceful exit. We buy the remaining hardware assets, you keep your title as a figurehead, and the shareholders get their stability back." I didn't blink. I didn't look at Alexander, who was sitting in the back corner of the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, a dark, silent shadow. I didn't need to. I could feel the hum of my own power, a steady, white-hot frequency that had nothing to do with the man behind me. "Stability," I repeated, my voice low and dangerously calm. "Is that what you call it when you buy a company, strip its soul, and sell the parts to the highest bidder?" "It's called business, Maya," the man said, using my first name as a weapon of diminishment. I leaned forward, my palms flat on the oak. The ivory silk of my blazer caught the morning sun. "You've made a fundamental error in your calculations, Mr. Sterling. You're looking at the devaluation of the code. You're not looking at the valuation of the network." I tapped a command on the holographic table. A map of the world appeared, glowing with thousands of blue pulses. The moment I released the science, I didn't lose my IP. I gained the world's R&D department. Every university in this pulse is currently optimizing my algorithm. By noon, we will have 10,000 new data points on neural regeneration that your proprietary silos could never achieve. I'm not selling hardware, Mr. Sterling. I'm running the OS that the entire future of medicine is built on. I straightened up, my eyes pinning him to his seat. Vanguard is over-leveraged in traditional pharmaceuticals. You need my bridge to stay relevant. So, here is my counteroffer. You will issue a public apology for the coercive rumors your firm helped spread during the Zurich fallout. You will sign a 5-year exclusivity contract to use our foundation's ethics board for your clinical trials. And in exchange, I won't buy your primary lender and shut you out of the market by Friday. The room went deathly silent. The men from Vanguard looked at each other, the arrogance in their eyes replaced by a frantic, scrambling fear. "You wouldn't," the lead man stammered. "I'm a Sterling," I said, a slow, lethal smile touching my lips. "We don't make threats, we make discoveries, and I've just discovered that Vanguard is obsolete." I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "You have 1 hour to decide. Marcus will show you to the elevator." As they scrambled out of the room, looking like they had just escaped a predator's den, I finally let out a breath. I felt the vibration of the room change. Alexander was moving. Alexander POV. I had spent my life as the predator in that room, but watching Maya dismantle Vanguard was the most erotic thing I had ever witnessed. I walked toward her, the sound of my boots on the hardwood the only noise in the boardroom. She was still standing at the head of the table, her chest rising and falling with the adrenaline of the kill. She looked magnificent, her eyes bright with the sterling fire, her posture that of a queen who had just finished a war and was already looking for the next horizon. "That was brutal," I murmured, stopping just a few feet away. I didn't touch her. I wanted to savor the sight of her in her full power. I believe you just broke the record for the fastest corporate surrender in the history of this tower. They thought I was weak because I chose to be honest, she said, turning to face me. The intensity in her gaze was staggering. They thought the soft side I showed the world was an invitation to take the room. They forgot that the person who writes the code is the person who owns the world, I said, finally stepping into her space. I reached out, my fingers grazing the silk of her blazer before sliding up to her neck. Her skin was hot, her pulse racing. You were incredible, Maya. I could feel the weight of your authority from the back of the room. It was intoxicating. Intoxicating, she whispered, her eyes darkening as she stepped closer, her chest brushing mine. You're not the steward's girl anymore, I growled, my hand sliding into her hair, tilting her head back. You're the woman who owns the room. And God help me, seeing you like that makes me want to do things that aren't in the Foundation's ethics mandate. Maya reached up, her fingers tangling in my tie, the one I had put on only because she asked me to. She pulled me down until our lips were inches apart. Then it's a good thing I'm the CEO, she breathed, because I'm the only one who can grant an exception to the rules. Maya POV. The boardroom doors were locked. The blinds were drawn, turning the glass-walled office into a private sanctuary of shadow and golden afternoon light. There was a new kind of heat between us, one that wasn't born from the desperation of the locked-in era or the trauma of the fallout. It was the heat of two equals who had finally found their rhythm. Alexander backed me against the oak table, his hands finding my waist with a possessiveness that felt like a reward rather than a shackle. I met his mouth with a hunger that was entirely my own. I wasn't surrendering to him, I was claiming him. You're shaking, he whispered against my lips. It's the power, I admitted, my hands sliding under his blazer to find the hard, familiar lines of his back. I never knew it felt like this, to be the one who decides. It's a drug, Maya. Be careful not to let it consume you. I have you to keep me grounded, I said, pulling him closer. He lifted me onto the table, the same way he had in the dangerous silence days, but everything was different. The dynamic had shifted. I was the one who controlled the tempo. I was the one who guided his hands. The physical intimacy that followed was a celebration of my rise. Every touch was an acknowledgement of my strength. Alexander moved with a reverence that bordered on worship, his eyes never leaving mine. He wanted to see me, the CEO, the scientist, the wife, and I wanted to show him everything. In the quiet of the office, surrounded by the empire we had rebuilt, we crossed a new line. It was the line where her power became our strength. As I cried out his name, my fingers digging into his shoulders, I realized that the greatest power I possessed wasn't the ability to destroy Vanguard or manage the board. It was the ability to be completely, unreservedly myself with the man who had once tried to own me. Alexander POV. I lay on the sofa in her office an hour later, watching her dress. She moved with a new grace, a confidence that seemed to radiate from her bones. She didn't look back to check if I was watching. She knew I was. She knew that from this moment forward, I was the one locked into her orbit, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The press conference is in 2 hours, she said, checking her watch as she adjusted her ponytail. Are you ready to be the silent consultant again? I'm ready to be whatever you need me to be, Maya. I stood up and walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her from behind. But I have a question. What? The fourth partner, Clara. You've been quiet about her since we got back from Verzeska. Maya went still. I've been thinking, she didn't just give us the heart, Alexander. She gave us a warning. She said, don't let them turn the soul into a secret. I think she was talking about more than just the mapping. You think there's another secret. I think the sovereign protocol wasn't just my father's idea. I think there's a whole network of people, the ones my mother worked with, who are still waiting for the code to be weaponized. Vanguard was just the first to try. I felt a surge of the old protective instinct, but I suppressed it. I looked at the woman in the mirror, the one who had just crushed a rival CEO. Then we hunt them, I said, my voice a low, lethal vibration. Not with a private army, with the truth. We use the foundation to track the ghosts and bring them into the light. Maya turned in my arms, her hazel eyes flashing with that familiar, beautiful fire. Together. Always. We walked out of the office, hand in hand. The fallout was a memory. The rise was our reality. And as we stepped into the elevator to face the world's cameras, I realized that the locked-in contract had finally reached its ultimate conclusion. I had been the one who wanted to own the room. But in the end, it was the woman who owned the room who had finally set me free. Maya POV, end of chapter 49. The press conference was a triumph. I stood at the podium in the Sterling Blackwood Plaza, the same place where Alexander had defended me weeks ago. But this time, I wasn't the one being protected. I was the one leading. I announced the global partnerships, the ethical mandates, and the future of the foundation. I spoke about my father, about the truth, and about the fact that the Sterling legacy was no longer for sale. I saw Alexander at the back of the crowd. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was smiling, a slow, proud smile that was meant only for me. The claim was ours. The future was waiting. And as the first light of dawn began to touch the skyline, I realized the final truth of our journey. The room wasn't worth owning, but the person in it was worth everything. Alexander POV. I watched the sunset from the penthouse balcony. Maya was inside, working on the next phase of the mapping rollout. The world was quiet. The board was silent. The enemies were at bay. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the Vigil of Justice notebook. I opened it to the very last page. Under the words, "the woman who owns him," I wrote one final sentence. Her power, the light that ended the dark. I looked at Maya through the glass, her face radiant in the evening glow. I was Alexander Blackwood. I had lost an empire, a name, and a reputation, and I had never been more powerful in my life. Next chapter, chapter 50, Equal Ground.